Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This video is meant to talk about district level assessments on the IEP. So in order to navigate to our guidance, I'm going to the IEP and then I'm going to go to the assessments page. And for today, just reviewing again, we talked about during the state assessments video, the bottom line, so that we have to identify those assessments that are going to be administered during the time frame of the IEP, and then document any accommodations or modifications. And so today we're specifically talking about district level assessments. And the go-to tool that I'm going to be highlighting and demonstrating in SpEd forms how to document information on there is this universal screening measures by grade and testing window. So I'll come back to that in just a second and just want to review the information on this page. A lot of it is under those state assessments because this is where we talk about the MCA and then alternatives to the MCA. I'm going to talk just a little bit for high school students for those graduation assessment requirements. It's typically the MCA or the MTAS. And then a college entrance exam is something that might be included for a student, kind of depending on their trajectory during high school, if they want to take like the ACT. And so that can sometimes be documented on an IEP. The thing with that, though, is that the ACT is run by a separate company. And so a lot of times what you will be asked is for the page on the IEP that shows where the student needs like those types of accommodations. So you're not really putting in the accommodation and setting it up at a district level for the student, but you would be documenting it in the IEP to provide to ACT or SAT if it's a student who needs that level of accommodation. The IEP would serve as proof for that. So again, we're going to be talking about district-wide assessments. There's not a ton of guidance on this because it's fairly simple, and the universal screening measure packet actually provides a lot of that information. So we're going to dig right into that. And actually, when you click on that link, it's going to bring you to the SpEd website. That is where this document lives. So once we pop that open, what you're going to see is this packet that's really organized by grade level. So if you are working, depending on what grade of student you're working with or the IEP that you're working on, that's where you're going to want to orient. And then once you dig into this, and actually just to save some scrolling, I'm going to just highlight elementary buildings. It talks specifically about the district level assessments that have already been agreed upon by the district. And so because you are working in a SpEd district, this is a joint effort where all 6 districts agree to do their different tests during the same kind of windows of time. And so that's why we have this packet and why this information exists, is because that's how that's set up. So what you'll see for the elementary buildings, as an example, are that we're going to do some academic screening in fall, winter, and spring. And so these are kind of your FAST testing is really maybe how you've heard of it, or screening measurements, and those count as our district level assessments. And that's why we need to put this information into the IEP is related to any of those accommodations. So any of the ones that are required are the ones that we're really talking about. And SEL right now is the area that's optional. So when I'm talking specifically about this information and putting it in the IEP, please understand I'm referencing academic testing. So there's a lot of information in this packet that I'm not going to go through, but what I am going to go through is kind of how to determine what test is being offered and how it's offered, how long it takes. All of that information is in this packet, and then you can use that information as an IEP team to determine whether a student requires accommodations. So as you can see here, if I scroll down a little bit further, it talks about all of those different things, and then we would make a decision and document that in the IEP. So I think the best way to work through that is to use a scenario of a student, and I have an elementary scenario and a secondary scenario. So the first one has to do with a student is in 3rd grade, spends the majority of his day with his general education class. He's pulled out a little bit for some reading and get some supplemental instruction in math. He has an accommodation to test in a quiet environment, but rarely uses it. And the IEP team had considered removing that accommodation, but decided to wait and just see how often the student uses it. So what would we do here if we're talking about district level assessments? Well, the first thing you would do would be to orient yourself to this universal screening measure. And then we want to find the grade that that student is in, which is 3rd grade. And so when I take a look at this, I see, okay, we're going to be doing some district level assessments in reading and in math. And in reading specifically, we're going to be doing A reading and CBM reading. And then I can look over and I can see, all right, so the A reading test is about 20 to 30 minutes. It's administered in a group on a Chromebook. And the CBM reading is about 5 minutes. That's individual, and that's going to be done paper pencil. And then when I think about math, we're going to be doing kind of something similar. So 20 to 30 minutes for one, about 5 minutes for another. Those are all group tests, and those are going to be done on the computer or the iPad. So again, kind of as I mentioned in the previous video on state assessments, what we want to make sure that we're doing is providing students accommodations related to where do they do their most amount of learning. And we don't want to, again, load in accommodations that aren't necessary if the student is, learning and taking tests in a specific environment. So you can kind of think about that as I orient to this page in the student's IEP. So I'm talking specifically about the assessments that are located on page 2. And this is where, spoiler alert, but this is where we document those district-wide assessments. So the first question is, are district-wide assessments given to students at this age level? And the answer is yes. So then what assessments are given? And we already kind of determined it's going to be A reading and A math. And do we think that this assessment is appropriate for the student? And I would say yes, for this particular scenario, they are. And then do we need to provide any kind of accommodations? And there'll be a drop-down list that pops out. And unfortunately, the drop-downs don't show up in the videos. And so that's why I can't kind of show you that. But really, I don't think that the student requires any accommodations in this particular scenario. And so I would be done with this page for this particular student. So now we're going to take a look at one other example, and I'm going to reset that page just so we can walk through it. So now I have a different student. I have a 10th grade student, and they have direct services in math, reading, and behavior skills. This student doesn't participate in general education math and reading, and instead they get replacement core instruction at their instructional level. The IEP team has determined that those classes are going to be substituted for graduation credit, and the team is trying to determine whether the student should take the MTAS. Hopefully what you're kind of thinking about is the MTAS is a state assessment. So for the purposes of what we're talking about now, which is district assessments, that's going to be something to keep in mind, but not completely relevant. So what I'm going to do then is I'm going to go to my universal screening packet/guide, and I am going to go to secondary buildings. This is a 10th grade student, and I'm going to take a look, and I'm going to see whether this student is going to be tested for any district level assessments. Now remember, this is different than the MCA, and so for this particular student, it looks like these are some assessments that are required. There are some assessments that are required for students who we've determined are at risk. And so the first thing to think about is this student going to be receiving any of these screenings? Because if they are, then I'm going to work through this process. And if they aren't, then it's going to be a different answer on my IEP. So I'm going to make the assumption in this particular case that this student is at risk because she's receiving special education pullout services. And that might be something that we want to measure in kind of a different way and have her take these tests. So I've determined that. And so I am going to we're going to be doing reading and math. These are A fast assessments. And then I can take a look and see, okay, it's going to be about 20 to 30 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes for that one. They're all done in a group setting, and some of them are done on a Chromebook and some of them are done with paper. So now I'm going to go back to my IEP and I'm going to make some decisions about how I'm going to approach this. And unfortunately, the scenario doesn't have any specific information, so I'll just kind of talk through that. Just a possible decision that could be made. So in this particular case, this student, the district-wide assessments are administered, but again, they might not be. If you made a different determination that the student wasn't at risk, then we would click they're not administered. We could clear all of this out, delete these two tests, and then we would be done with this page. So in this example, though, I said we were going to say that there are assessments that are administered. So then there are two of them. There is the AFAST and the A reading and A math. And we do feel that the assessment is appropriate. And then we didn't really have a whole lot of information about this student, but what I am going to say is I'm just going to anticipate that this is a student that needs frequent breaks. And so even though, several of those assessments are only maybe the maximum amount, I think was 30 minutes long, this student might need a break in during those assessments, because I know this kiddo and I kind of know what he or she might need. So I'm going to just put that on her IEP. And so that is essentially how you can document those district level assessments for students.